Well, good morning again, and another Friday, another beautiful sunny Friday in temporary or partial lockdown. I'm going to start a new set of meditations today, and I want to look at some of the hard sayings in the Bible. I call them hard sayings because that's what the crowd say in John 6. This is a hard saying, who can bear it? But today I don't want to look at John 6. I want to look instead at that famous place where Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead, which has been mentioned to me by several people over the years as something that is both harsh and sometimes confusing. So I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 8 and Luke chapter 9, the two places which record this conversation. Matthew 8, starting verse 19. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." So that's Matthew's version. Luke has a slightly different slant on it. As they were walking along the road, a man said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." He said to another man, "Follow me." But he replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Slightly different versions. We'll look at both of them in a moment. Now, it seems to me that in almost any civilized society, filial duty is important. Filial duty, the duty of a son or a daughter to care for and see to the needs of their elderly parents. Britain is actually not that civilized. Sometimes people don't do that. But in a civilized society, children look after their parents. And of course, for the first century Jew, it was in his law. A key part of the law of Moses: honor your father and mother, that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. In the Ten Commandments, God says you'll dwell in Canaan land for a good long time if you honor mother and father. And Jesus talked about that commandment, pointed out that included providing for them financially. So here is Jesus apparently ordering a man to forget his duty as a son and telling him instead to leave all those obligations and let someone else fill the gap that he's leaving. Let the dead bury their own dead. It seems a bit harsh as well, doesn't it? Let the dead bury their own dead. In fact, it sounds almost like a cult leader. I know, in fact, that pseudo-Christian cults often embrace these texts. They love them because they use them as an excuse to break the ties between their fresh converts and their own natural families. They point out that Jesus says, "Let the dead bury their dead." Raise your loyalty to the cult above your loyalty to family responsibilities. So not only is this a hard saying, not only does it seem a bit harsh, we know that it has been abused. But there are some elements I want to point out which don't take away the hardness of the saying, but might make it a bit more understandable. The first thing is that this man wants to put off following Jesus for some time. Nearly everyone who studies these sayings comes to the conclusion that he's not simply saying, "Look, my daddy has just died, can I bury him please?" Because in those days burial was a very quick matter. Often ideally, people were buried on the day they died, certainly the day after. So I don't think that he's saying, look, I've just got a burial to organise or a hole to dig. This is much more the idea of, well, look, my father is old. I don't know how long he's got to live. Let me look after Dad and bury him, and then I'll follow you. So this is about putting off following for some time. Secondly, even that is still considered in most societies an honourable thing to do. He wants to be like Abraham. Remember, Abraham was called to leave Ur and be a wanderer. In fact, he only goes to the city of Haran and he settles there until his father dies, and then he resumes the wandering life. So in a sense, Abraham is quite an honourable example. And I also want to say, I don't think this is about salvation versus condemnation. I don't think this man is going to go down to the lake of fire if he chooses to look after his father. It's actually not about salvation in itself, it's about being a follower, a disciple. In fact, Matthew uses the word disciple. He wants time off. He wants to be furloughed to look after his dear old dad until his dad is safely buried. In Luke's Gospel, the circumstance is particularly Jesus has begun on that long walk through Luke's Gospel from Galilee to Jerusalem. So while Jesus is on that walk, if he says to someone, "Follow me," he's inviting them to something very particular. He's inviting them to join that select band of disciples who are going to become the gospel men, the preachers of the kingdom, one of the apostles and prophets upon which the church is founded. So following Jesus, walking that road, is a very particular commitment. And if you're going to walk that road, it must be your priority. So he has this choice. Are you going to walk down that road with Jesus, or are you going to take a turning off that road to look after your father? Now, in the end, those things I've said do not explain away this text. It is still a hard saying. It is still a surprising demand made by Jesus. And I don't want to explain these verses away because they're meant to be hard sayings. Let us hear the challenge to put Jesus first, above everything else. It reminds me that not every temptation is a temptation to sin. This man's temptation wasn't a temptation to do something wicked or selfish. It was to simply do what would normally be considered right. As a rule, people should honour their parents, but sometimes normal duties must be laid aside for the greater and more important cause of following Christ. And often people do have a crunch time, a time when they have to choose between discipleship or family. This is common when baptism happens and the family have a different religious loyalty. I have had friends, good friends, who were Jewish, Sikh, or from a Buddhist background, who've either had a break with their family or at least a very difficult few years with their family as a result of being baptized as a Christian. Sometimes the crunch doesn't come at baptism, sometimes it's years into your Christian life that you will eventually face a question like this. When a good or honourable commitment stands in the way of your personal following of Jesus. In Luke's Gospel, the guy is invited to become a witness, a preacher of the kingdom of God. Now, if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to seek the kingdom and its righteousness first, not second. So let the dead bury their dead. Yes, it's a harsh turn of phrase, but it reminds us that we live in a world which is actually dying. And what Jesus is saying is, let some of those dying people look after the other dying people, because you have to follow Jesus. And in the case of Luke's Gospel, following Jesus means following him to his cross. It means accepting that we die to the world because we die with Christ. And it occurred to me that actually, if we die with Christ, we have to die to the world. Perhaps I'm getting a bit carried away here, but it's almost like choosing which death you will adopt, the death of Christ to this world or the death of this world to Christ. Anyway, that's just a little fancy that I had. The main thing is this, Christian brothers and sisters, let the dead bury their dead. As for you, follow Jesus. Let us hear this hard word and respond the way we're meant to. Anyway, that's my first thought on these hard sayings of Jesus. We'll look at another one tomorrow. Bye for now.